the title of this session as a connection directly to museum and museums, and narrative and knowledge. That's the title of our panel. And we have with us for the first presentation, Lucia Perez and Maria Gaton Fraile. Lucia is from the EAE Business School in Madrid, and Maria from the University of Malaga, Spain. And they're gonna start a presentation. They're gonna present a research which is called Inputs, Connections and Innovation in Fashion Museums, the Effect in the COVID-19 Context. So you can share with us the presentation and you can start. I think it's a good moment to start, yes.
Okay, thank you so much, Gabriel. Good afternoon. We are very grateful for the opportunity of participating in this prestigious Congress. And we want to thank the organization for the big effort to organize it so well online. You have made possible to create the atmosphere as if we all are there in Lyon. Thank you very much. As you said, my name is Lucia. I am a program master director and a teacher at EAE Business School in Madrid.
My name is Maria Gaton. I'm a PhD candidate in the University of Malaga, and I'm a communications manager in Brussels, and I headed for some time the ICOM communications department.
The title of our presentation, as Gabriel says, is Inputs, Connections and Innovation in Fashion Museums, the Effect in the COVID-19 Context. There is no sufficient historical perspective to evaluate the social, political, economical, and cultural impacts of COVID crisis, but we can affirm that uncertainty is a key word for these times. But to face all the changes that are emerging, it is necessary to work in three levels to make innovation possible. The first level is a level of dialogue with the environment, and that means inputs. A second level of making connections, and a third level corresponds to culture open to talent, and that means innovation. And although the concept of innovation is associated with the present, it is not possible without entering into a dialogue with the past and with the future. Museums dedicated to the transmission of legacies of clothing collection play a fundamental role in this field, because in them values are related and interact with each other through fashion, creating the appropriate framework for innovation in such a way that makes possible the fulfillment of the mission of the institution, which is the service of society and its development. So here we have the object of our study, the implementation of the anthropological or prosocial management model in the context of COVID-19 in museums dedicated to the transmission of legacies of clothing collections and their effects on the development of individuals and society. For that purpose, we have designed our research with the following items regarding the management model of a museum, regarding to the mission statement, regarding to the public and the development of the people, and regarding to COVID-19 crisis. To carry out our research, we have used the following scientific methodology. We have worked with a case study about Balenciaga Museum. We have made a documentary search and analysis, an in-depth interview with the director, Miriam Vives, and finally, to complete the analysis, a focus group. As we said, we've done a documentary search and analysis of the main items that affects the object of our study. And in order to have a proper theoretical framework, we have been working with these 5 topics: anthropological or prosocial management model, beauty and culture, visual intelligence, fashion museum, and Cristóbal Valenciaga. So here we come to the first item, the first topic, the anthropological or prosocial management model. And this is one of the most important parts of our research field. And why? Because we feel very much attracted by the importance of the human being. And basically, what the anthropological management model says is that if you put the person in the center of the organization, and this means strategy, policies, etc., looking for the best of the human being, the efficiency, the effectiveness, and the consistency is guaranteed. And this is based on the transcendent motivation that seeks the benefit for other people. The verb that defines it is to serve, to satisfy the real needs of people. Materials, knowledge, and human development gain importance in the development of human, though as an instrument to solve real problems. And beauty will save the world. This is Dostoevsky's words. That surely you agree that today, more than ever, take on their deepest meaning. Because what pushes the human being out of a crisis? Something to lift it up. And this is why it's so important in this context to consider the importance that culture and beauty have nowadays. The society that cultivates its knowledge is laying the foundation for new possibilities. It is like the land. If you take care of a land, you will get fruit. And the same happens with society. And there are 3 important points in this sense that we want to highlight. The first one is that true goodness and beauty are values that drag one another. The second, as they are not formally identified, we can compare them to 3 routes that must be walked according to their respective itinerary. And as Urbina points, the priority is love for beauty instead of public service. And this is the best way to be useful to men. He says specifically, I make art for men for beauty, for the love of beauty. Beauty first, later the men. And this is the only way to truly love men. And here with Bill Viola, we bring this quote to close the second part of the theoretical framework. And Bill Viola is a very well-known artist for his video artwork. And he says, I have come to realize that the most important place where my work comes to life is not in a gallery of a museum, nor in a room projection, nor on a television, not even on the video screen, but in the mind of the viewer who has seen it. In fact, it can only exist here. But do we land all that has been said on the, how do we do it? Do we land on the human being? It can help us to consider visual intelligence. Amy Herman has developed the visual intelligence theory. The research has found that stimulation of environmental input, for example, as we are working, gazing at a dress, increases cortical development at any age. If we can keep our sense and our wit agile, it will show in our reactions, positively affecting our personal development. And analyzing a suit in a fashion museum, question the who, what, where, when, and why. It helps us, as Herman proposes, to use the museum object, in this case, fashion, as the ideal tool to improve our observation, our perception, and our communication skills.
Maria, we cannot hear you.
All right. Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry, we have gone through the theoretical framework regarding the fashion museums. So Svensson, for example, says that fashion museums have been playing an important role in society, especially in the 21st century, making museums accessible to diverse audiences. So from the dress history to the new way of understanding fashion from the museum's angles, which is an historical perspective, they provide a wider scope, such as the conceptual perspective, the historical background, the consumer dimension, and the way fashion is displayed with a museography perspective. Fashion connects life and art, as Simon says, and the museum is a perfect place where this takes place. The museum is a place where the aesthetics and the profane, the art and life comes together. Strauss states these aspects and includes fashion as part of a wider democratization, as part of an increasingly widespread consumptionism, as a kind of pluralistic and multifaceted mediatization, and as pure commerce. Petrov assures that in the last 10 years, fashion has increasingly been shown as a cultural product with a wider popularity and visibility in museum exhibitions, and there has been an evolution on the fashion curating practices, with a clear difference between the fashion at museums and the fashion industry. Melchior assures that the fashion museology can transform museums into visitor-centered forums where the cultural complexity, the socio-political, and the behavior reality become a focal part of the story. Now we're going to turn into the Balenciaga Museum exhibitions. For Charlotte Nicholas, Balenciaga has had a crucial importance in the history of fashion, not only leaving an aesthetic contribution, but also knowledge through the academic publications that have been carried out. So Balenciaga has been the theme of numerous exhibitions within the fashion museography history, with curators such as Diane Freeland, Marie-André Jouvet, Leslie Miller, Pamela Golbin, Hamish Bowles, Miron Arcayuth, Kat Debo, and Oliver Suland. Mira Walker, for example, examined Balenciaga and its legacy, including the perspectives of clients, fashion buyers, and designers for whom it had been an inspiration. On the occasion of the exhibition Balenciaga Paris, in the catalogue that was published for the exhibition, Pamela Golbin developed the history of the house in Paris, mainly through photographs of the time and the journalism fashion. Between 2010 and 11, the Reina Sofia Spanish Institute in New York held a small exhibition that explored Balenciaga's relationship with art, history, culture, and regional clothing in Spain. Fashion designer Oscar de la Renta, who worked at the Madrid Haute Couture house of Balenciaga when he was young, originally came up with this exhibition idea, and Hamish Bowles curated the installation. Pamela Golbin, we already said, was the curator of Balenciaga Paris, said and recalled what Balenciaga used to say: a good couturier must be an architect for lines, a sculptor for form, a painter for color, a musician for harmony, and a philosopher for measurement. On the occasion of the European Union's 2018 European Year of Cultural Heritage, there were 3 exhibitions organized for Balenciaga. Conversation was on show between March 18 and January 19, preceding the installment of Cristóbal Balenciaga, Fashion and Heritage, the second one, and Contexts.
So here we come to the conclusions. And the first one, after analyzing all the work and putting into practice all the scientific methodology, is that we conclude that when the museum has implemented the anthropological management model, the mission is the compass that marks the north. And what the museum really seeks is public service and the development of people. The second is that the public can be relied upon more for the elaboration of the mission statement. But as well as a result of the pandemic, they are being listened more. And so they have a greater impact on the management of the museum. The third one is that fashion is considered mostly as a means of artistic expression with a high anthropological value because it leads to a better understanding of the human being. And this has a direct effect in terms of innovation, so necessary to face the emerging changes due to the COVID-19 crisis. Fashion Museum has turned out to be an invaluable tool for the person to rediscover their identity through their past, achieve a greater understanding of the present, and from astonishment, find new paths of innovation.
Regarding the COVID-19 crisis, the cultural and the creative sectors have been some of the most affected by the corona due to the loss of revenues opportunities and especially in the small institutions. So the key role of culture and creativity have been key for the well-being of society. The cultural content supports the mental and the well-being of citizens, and museums have proved to provide online content during the crisis. As regard to the Balenciaga Museum, during the COVID, the museum has changed the management, the customer orientation, the flows in the museum, and a physical transformation of the museum space with open atrium, with rooms for capacity control, the creation of protective barriers for staff, and other interactive elements. So some new services provided by the museum during the COVID were the virtual and immersive VR to physical exhibitions, temporary exhibitions only on the virtual plane, training courses of its program dedicated to professionals in digital, the International Research Congress on Cristobal Balenciaga in the month of October via streaming, which was a huge success, and the creation of exclusive digital content such as 3D scans of collectibles. And also, some of them have been used in projects with international fashion schools. And this links to the final end of the presentation. And we can see that in this case, the Balenciaga Museum has incorporated the pro-social management model, putting the audience, the person at the center of the museum, providing service to what audiences were needing in times of crisis in record time.
To finish this presentation, we want to thank the Museo Balenciaga, especially the director, Miren Vives Almandoz, because without her help and her implication with science, it wouldn't have been possible to fulfill this research. And we close as we started, expressing also our gratitude to all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lucia and Maria, for this very interesting presentation. Very happy to see the Balenciaga conference in your presentation. It was a very beautiful experience for me as well. I was there online, obviously. So thank you very much.
That's great.
And I leave the word and the online presentation to Catherine Glover from Northumbria University. Maybe you can end the sharing of the screen, Lucia.
Mm-hmm.
Great, so that Catherine can share her screen with us. Now she will discuss with us fashion storytelling through dress and Lego minifigures, Mary Queens of Scots. So you can start, Catherine. Thank you.
Fantastic. Has it come up big? You can see it correctly?
Yes, perfect.
Fantastic. Hello, I'm Catherine Glover. I'm Programme Leader of the Masters of Research Design, a Senior Lecturer on BA Fashion Communication and a PhD candidate at Northumbria University in the UK. Today I'm sharing with you my research into fashion storytelling through dress and Lego minifigures, Mary, Queen of Scots. Some months ago, I was on holiday in Scotland with my family, and I decided to visit Falkland Palace with my son. Located in the Kingdom of Fife, this royal palace was originally built between 1501 and 1541 and was the country residence of the Stuart kings and queens. The National Trust for Scotland now acts as deputy keeper, and they claim that Mary, Queen of Scots, was enchanted with the palace and took advantage of Falkland's vast estate to pursue falconry and hunting, while also enjoying a game of tennis in what is now the oldest surviving real or royal tennis court in the world. The palace can be visited by the public, and upon walking through the big stone arch you can see in the picture of the old fortified building and around the richly furnished rooms with my son, it struck me that this palace, with its historic legacy and royal stories, was really loaded with storytelling. There was a Lego trail, for example, which consisted of an A4 piece of paper with clues to find 14 little Lego minifigures hidden around the palace and its estate, from the intimate private quarters to the ornate chapel royal to the circa 500-year-old tennis court. The Lego trail was aimed at engaging young children in the story of Mary and her forebears, and the minifigures ranged, and over the months varied, from the Queen of Scots, her father, King James V, a gardener, a skeleton representing the maltreated David, Duke of Rothesay, and Queen Elizabeth II, who now owns the palace. And these Lego minifigures were placed in relevant context. For example, the Mary Queen of Scots figure is positioned in a shady corner of the Queen's bedroom, alongside her four-poster bed, or a four-poster bed, and a mannequin wearing a black dress in the style of the 16th century. These modern plastic objects displayed alongside the material legacy of royal past. My son and I had an amazing and immersive time. Our visiting time was exponentially increased by these Lego figures, enhancing my trip, bringing interest to the history, and remarkably, my son, who has attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, paid full attention to the guides, who recounted to us the stories behind the Lego figures, the real characters, the facts, with a fun twist. This positive experience encouraged me to return again the following day to the palace, this time with my older son, to whom it had been recommended by his brother. The experience made me question it in the following way. What storytelling criteria, Bruno 1990, are coming into play here in the palace to work in synergistic union between the environmental context, the palace, the bedroom, and material, Lego and textile dress, the content? What value is there in using miniatures as playful story props to support the telling and retelling of historic legacies? And how do these Lego figures act as fashionable, symbolic and aesthetic thirds, Froggatt and Trustram 2014, to energize storied characters, events and plots for visitors? I use a mixed methodological approach in my fashion research, which Kinchelow calls a bricolage or pick and mix approach. Narrative inquiry was the principal method that I used, as it views individuals as living storied lives on storied landscapes. It also requires the researcher to position themselves in an integrated manner in the research field, so one becomes an active participant, what's called in the midst, lending an autobiographical perspective. I also employ textual analysis, a method that privileges meaning making as a critical lens and views a text as something that we make meaning from. The four idiosyncratic perspectives that I was most interested in understanding was, firstly, the expert view of the individual who had placed the Lego figures in context, Naomi Webster, the learning officer at Falkland Palace, owned by the National Trust Scotland. My own son, in order to better understand his visitor experience, myself as participant researcher, and additionally to lend a wider expert viewpoint, Georgina Ripley, Senior Curator of Modern and Contemporary Fashion and Textiles from National Museums Scotland. It was first necessary to examine Falkland Palace as a contextual research field and make a critical evaluation of the three-dimensional space within which storied content, lives, and themes were being played out over time and space. Narrative inquirers Clandon and Connolly believe that context is necessary for making sense of any person, event, or thing. Narrative scholar Abbott H. Porter says that the term story world can be understood contextually as the diegesis, or world in which a story takes place. Diegesis is a telling of a story. And Naomi Webster agrees. I think the palace, she said, could be a story world. I think we are telling stories. So my research sets out to explore firstly, what storytelling criteria coming into play here to work in union between environmental context and material content. Psychologist Jerome Bruner proposes that people partake in storytelling when they're involved in an activity with the following criteria: action directed towards a goal, order established between events and states, sensitivity towards what is canonical in human interaction, and the revealing of a narrator's perspective. Each occurrence of storytelling must fulfill these criteria. In my longer paper, there are examples of how this is in evidence, and here I share one. On the Lego trail sheet, Naomi Webster has constructed a short story vignette for each character, and they comply with Bruner's storytelling criteria in general. For the Queen Lego figure, it says, Mary loved to visit Falkland Palace. When the kings and queens came to Falkland, they loved to hunt, play tennis, do archery, and ride horses. When Mary played tennis, she sometimes wore boys' trousers instead of a dress, as it made it easier to run around. There is here action directed towards a goal, the young queen enjoying pastimes in the palace enabled by fashion. An order established between events and states, visitations of the royal household to Falkland Palace with the pursuit of fun in mind, and the hierarchy state of the Lego Queen, symbolising Mary, Queen of Scots. Sensitivity towards what is canonical in human interaction, fun, pastimes, leisure, emotional joy, and the revealing of a narrator's perspective, which is Mary herself as a Lego figure, potentially looking out on the palace from wherever she has been placed, giving her an autobiographical viewpoint. The second question I explored was what value is there in using miniatures as playful story props to support the telling and retelling of historic legacies? To answer this, I'm sharing with you my comparison analysis of one specific Lego figure to one dress in the context of the palace. In the Lego trail, the characters all vary in social status and historical characterization. As a story prop, the figure of the Queen is memorable, and indeed, I bought one myself. To answer this, I'm sharing with you my comparison of what my son and I saw when I saw her in the palace. She was dressed in blue dress with a gold pattern with a suggestion of print or embroidery, a red diamond pattern on decorative gold band on the dress and the waist, suggestion of jewel adornment, red top dress layer with hearts and diamonds decoration in gold, a red cape, and she was also given a white tennis racket. The original Lego minifigure comes from the Lego Series 15 minifigure collection, yet the figure displayed at Falkland has been modified along her passageway through eBay and Webster. Webster's constructed Queen character is missing the black and white cape distinctive of ermine, and most surprisingly, the crown. Webster recounts the story of selecting an appropriate figure for Queen Mary, saying, in terms of garb, she was the most appropriate looking Lego. This is the most ornate dress that I could find in the Lego world. I think it works quite well. It was really based around just trying to find something that I thought represented her and the kind of things that would have been worn in the period. I tried with the different characters as I went to add a little thing extra. So for Mary, it ties in really well that she has a little tennis racket, and then we're able to tell the story of one of the oldest tennis courts in the world that she loved to play on. So for Webster, it is the individual person in context that is the priority story to tell, and not the object-based story. She is prioritizing verisimilitude, the appearance of truth-likeness over truth. Naomi Webster reflects on the value of the figures as curatorial props. She says, I think the Lego is an excellent prop in terms of what we're looking for, was something that would hold children in rooms. So the fact that Lego was so small and quite easy to hide in places that were not particularly easy to find actually meant that longer dwell time was spent within each of the rooms as family was moving through the palace. As interpreted findings, I suggest that using the lens of psychoanalytic object theory, that these familiar playthings are utilized as emotional attachment objects, providing visitors with a sense of safe containment. That the Lego story props contribute to the fantastical story world, so that the visitors empathize with the idea of a queen and the life of her in a palace. That the physical situated presence of Lego and its status as a contemporary plaything signifies subconsciously to the visitors that the historic Renaissance palace is a playground, and that the result is a sense of relaxation and joyful agency as visitors are surrounded by the faded royal domesticity. In contrast to the Lego Mary, Mary's fashion is also represented through a dress displayed on a mannequin in the Queen's room. Made in 2015 by costume volunteer Scott Schiavone, Webster describes it as having lots and lots of brocade. And she says the thing that I always remember about it is also her cross. There's a little cross pendant hanging from it, which obviously, when we're talking about Mary, Queen of Scots, ties into her whole religious narrative. For Webster, there is great meaning to the jewellery as it connects with religion, which was of prime importance to Queen Mary's life and subsequent death. Webster comments that the design of the dress is loosely based, as she says, on the portrait of Mary, Queen of Scots, after Nicholas Hilliard. Inscribed as 1578, the painting is in the National Portrait Gallery collection, and the website gives the following details. This portrait on the right, which was once in the royal collection, is probably based on an image from the life. The Latin inscription records that she's been a prisoner for 10 years, and the cross attached to her rosary bears the letter S, possibly for Stuart, on each of its arms. Again, Webster's curatorial judgment of the value of the displayed object is biased towards verisimilitude or truth-likeness rather than truth. The displayed replica dress is close enough to contribute to the storytelling. As story prop, the replica dress has been used as both display object and warm costume, as Webster recounts. She says our education guides, when they're taking schools around, are all in period costume. Originally, it was a dress that was intended to possibly just be a costume. And then we actually found out it was quite tricky to take on and take off. So that's why it became a dress on display. She continues, we use the dress in our discussions with school groups around fashion of the time, and we compare and contrast it to modern clothing. However, she acknowledges its limitations while on a mannequin, claiming that to best tell the legacy narratives of the palace and its occupants, I think the Lego is a better story prop because it spreads across the site and does a different job than a singular static dress in a room. In my findings, I interpret that the dress is acting as an instructional narrative tool and story prop. The ornate decoration of the dress, combined with the signification of iconographic jewellery, is at the core of Webster's narrative recounting. That this is a materialised account told through symbolic storytelling, and that Mary's fashionable dress, whether on or off the body, is functioning as a didactic story prop used to initiate dialogic experiences for the audience. So how are these Lego figures acting as fashionable, symbolic and aesthetic thirds, Froggers and Trust in 2014, that energize story characters, events and plots for visitors? This question builds on the psychoanalytic understanding of the third position, from which a relation between the object and self can be thought about, Britain 1998. We can then examine the third space between object and subject, and the space where they meet, impact and form each other, so the object itself transforms into a symbolic and aesthetic third, Dudley 2010, Froggatt et al. 2011. Here, the theory's relevance to this study is to explore how individuals at the palace, myself, my son, Webster, create a personal relation to the Lego character and dress. And in the process, the objects are transformed so that they become to symbolize experience. In the longer paper, I analyze Webster's and my own negotiation to transformative objects. Here, I share evidence of this process happening for my son. Some days after we returned from holiday, I found him immersed in his bedroom, building a narrative scene. He'd searched a mountain of plastic Lego bricks accumulated over 2 generations of the family and found his own Lego queen from series 15. Again, missing her ermine cape, her golden crown, and this time her hair. The scene he had built was of a castle, resplendent with a turret and the imprisoned Duke of Rothesay. Queen Mary was hurtling over the wooden rickety bridge to save the Duke, her cape flying behind her. My son had created a fresh and storied account of Mary in situ. This was evocative social re-storytelling in action, using the same Lego story props to show royal drama in context, yet this time authored by an 8-year-old. He recounted the whole story and then in a stream of consciousness linked back to his experience visiting Falkland Palace, saying, "So I like fashion on the Lego, but on mannequins, it just looks like ornament." I asked him how he liked to learn about history, and he said, "Well, education without fun, I don't call that education, I call it torture or something." Georgina Ripley at the National Museum of Scotland discusses the responsibility of collective engagement and how cultural institutions need to be inclusive in the future to more multiple voices, lives, experiences, and stories as a critical framework of interpretation. She notes, essentially, an organisation like ours is holding Scotland's material culture in trust for the people. We only have a job because we're kind of safeguarding this heritage for people. So you can't take the people out of that equation, if you like. What they think about the gallery, what they feel when they see objects or when they see displays, that has to be important. That has to inform what we do. This wider research has implications for large and small scale cultural venues and institutions alike to remind cultural auteurs, such as curators, stylists, producers, that it is storytelling that prevails when engendering legacy-focused narratives, and that the portfolio of materials adopted can be fluid as long as they have the ability to transcend their original purpose through common agency and to be elevated into transformative aesthetic and symbolic thirds. This research leads one to consider that engagement with historic legacies by intergenerational audiences on multiple levels is best serviced through a rich, multi-layered story world, where participatory narratives are employed in diegesic harmony, and audiences can self-select their own bricolage or pick-and-mix approach to transformative engagement. In 200 years' time, let us consider the personal stories of Mary, Queen of Scots, rooted in verisimilitude or truth, will continue to be told. And it is just the mediums, materials, channels of dialogic communication, along with the authors of those stories, me, you, Webster, Lego Queen, that will change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine, for a fascinating presentation. Thank you. Perfect. So I'll introduce myself. I will share my screen and I will start my presentation. I think you should be seeing it. The title of the presentation is an explicit reference to that of the exhibition curated by Grazietta Butazzi in 1980 at the Museo Paul di Pezzoli in Milan. The title is 1980-2020. The exhibition was called 1922-1943, 20 Years of Italian Fashion. And it was an experience that allows us to raise some crucial questions today about the cultural status of fashion in relation to the machinery of exhibiting and to the museum. At the beginning of a decade, the 80s, that was fundamental not only to the fine-tuning of the mechanism for putting fashion on show, but above all to the definition of fashion itself as a discipline, to the attention it focused on themes and problems like the reconstruction of its history, the conservation of objects, and the question of the relationship between practices of presentation in museums and forms of commercial display. In 2020, the exhibition Memos on Fashion in this Millennium, curated by Maria Luisa with a display designed by Judith Clark at the Museum Paul di Pezzoli in Milan, reactivated Grazietta Butazzi exhibition and set out to present a series of three-dimensional reflections on contemporary fashion and its qualities, taking Italo Calvino's 6 Memos for the Next Millennium as its point of departure. In this presentation, an explicit dialogue is established between these two exhibitions and a comparison made of their ability as critical and theoretical reflection to move between the past and the present of fashion. Through analysis of both these shows, this contribution looks at the state of Italian fashion studies and the cultural status of fashion as a discipline that is defined in the encounter with the museum and with the practice of fashion curation. In 1980, Grazietta Buttazzi curated the exhibition 1922-1943, 20 Years of Italian Fashion at the Museo Pol di Pezzoli. It was a fundamental experience, but not only for, you see the fashion exhibition as an entity, but also and above all the characterization of fashion itself as a discipline. Re-examining this exhibition means moving between telling the story of an important event and the analysis of its role in fashion studies over years in which, especially in Italy, an awareness of the need to come up with systems and institutions capable of preserving and studying fashion was emerging. In the introduction to the catalogue, it was stressed the major institutional effort that lay behind the project and the cooperation with the fashion system. Not coincidentally, the subtitle of the exhibition, of the title page of the catalogue, read "Proposal for a Fashion Museum in Milan." The exhibition, curated by Buttazzi with the coordination of Alessandra Mottola Molfino, tackled 20th century directly, and in order to do so, began to define methods of research, conservation, and display different from those used for clothing and objects that belong to a less recent past and that were usually placed in the category of costume. It was an exhibition of fashion, and over the years has become a point of reference for anyone wishing to take on contemporary fashion, at least in Italy, of course. The research that preceded the exhibition coincided with the study and reconstruction of a crucial period for contemporary Italian fashion, which came into focus as a system during the 20 years of fascist rule. Buttazzi's work consisted in putting materials coming from museum collections with pieces tracked down in private collection as a result of thorough research. More than 300 pieces in all, with over 80 mannequins between full lengths and busts. The elaborate exhibition project occupied the whole Museo Pol di Pezzoli, both the ground and the first floor, thereby colonizing the entire space. On the ground floor, the exhibition was laid out in what are now known as the Salone dell'Affresco, the Stanza dei Tessuti, and the Sala dei Pizzi, with a complex structure, which you can see here, of showcases designed by the architect Takashi Shimura to contain and display the sequence of themes identified. The project drawings and the museum archives conveyed a sense of a progressive adjustment of the structure, which eventually developed into a labyrinth of showcases for visitor to pass through, animated by different levels on the inside and by a number of exhibition modules tinted in different colors, used to display accessories, fabrics, mannequins, and busts. A group of mannequins in conversation at the foot of the grand staircase provided a stage introduction to the section of the exhibition on the first floor, where visitors could move between different rooms. Amongst the work kept and displayed in the museum were scattered a series of group of mannequins in dialogue with one another. In the Salone Dorato, as you can see in this picture, the installation consisted of mannequins sitting and standing in front of a large window in a model that recalled a conversation piece. Francesco Pertegato at the time was responsible for mounting the clothing and the mannequins. He told me of something that is of great value today because it makes clear that the exhibition served as a testing ground on which to try out and check the effectiveness of techniques of conservation and display specific to 20th century fashion. Moreover, in a museum that did not have spaces designed for preparation and display, nor appropriate equipment. The museum was not a fashion museum. Pertegato also recalled that it had not been possible to devote to the weeks all the time and materials needed to reproduce the stylized ones that were at the time being used by the Kyoto Costume Institute. Following Buttazzi's instructions, shaped and modeled sheets of thin white card were utilized to hint at the hairstyles without attempting to reconstruct them entirely. So his words are crucial, partly because they assign the project a role in shaping the professional figures that turn around an exhibition and a museum that collects and displays fashion. Pertegato speaks, in fact, of a paradigmatic trio for every operation carried out on a museum collections that took shape during the work on the exhibition on the Pol di Pezzoli. the planning supervisor, the curator, conservator, and the restorer. So 20 anni di moda italiana, 20 years of Italian fashion at the Museo Pol di Pezzoli can still be regarded today as a pioneering experience for exhibitions and museums devoted to fashion in the national Italian panorama, but also in relation to the international one. In 2019, curator Maria Luisa Frisa started a conversation with exhibition maker Judith Clark, and that turned around two themes. On the one hand, the possibility of utilizing Italo Calvino's 6 memos for the next millennium to explore the form of contemporary fashion, and the other, the reactivation of a seminal exhibition, the one organized by Butazzi in 1980, and Space for Italian Fashion Studies, and for the creation of a museum of fashion. Reactivating this space today, the Museo Pol di Pezzoli, with an exhibition devoted to the forms of fashion and contemporary fashion, and simultaneously reflecting on the intention behind the exhibition in 1980, signifying taking stock of the situation of fashion studies in Italy, in their relationship with the museum, and with exhibition making, understood as a theoretical reflections in 3 dimensions. Clark very often uses words in the titles of her project that at once express the choices connected with the display and constitute a methodology of inquiry, one that utilizes the exhibition project to frame questions rather than to offer the visitor simple answers or a didactic narrative. Allusions and conversation are terms that often crop up in the reflection of the exhibition maker, but is above all in her work as a curator that Clark puts this word into effect 3-dimensionally. The display makes metaphorical use of terms that we usually assign to reflection couched in the medium of the written or spoken word. It suffices to think of the exhibition Brilliant After Brilliant, which she organized in 2012 in Venice, or the one called The Concise Dictionary of Dress, which she organized in London in 2010. In a way, this project had a direct connection with the idea at the base of memos, that is to say, using Calvino lectures as a means of imagining and shaping the structure of an exhibition. Calvino words treated as aids to reflection on what changes in and fashion, what stays the same. The word memos also evoked the legendary notes typed by Vreeland when she was editor of the American edition of Vogue, notes that sum up the speed with which Vreeland's imagination operated, that were used to plan the magazine, but that also functioned as mood boards made up of words. Thus, memos set out to construct a discourse on method, which is to say a reflection on fashion curating and on its ability to handle the different products of fashion itself, not just the objects, but also the images and the words. On the ground floor of the Museo Pol di Pezzoli, Memos was inserted into the Salone dell'Affresco and in the Sala dei Tessuti, where part of the exhibition curated by Butazzi had been housed in 1980. At the center of the Salone dell'Affresco was placed a model that reconstructed the design of architect Takashi Shimura for a display of the exhibition 1922-1943, 20 years of Italian fashion. The model stressed the importance of the project, and in the Sala dei Tessuti, a blow-up of one of the photos of the display in 1920, uncovered in the archives of the museum, held a dialogue with some of the pieces that were on show at the time and are now in Palazzo Morando in Milan, through a structure of pale plywood that exposed its temporary dimension. In this way, through this sign that was a mark of the past and at the same time an indication of the contemporary effort of reactivation, the display was able to make the first reflection on the fashion of the new millennium, asking what is inspiration and what is citation. The use of the photographic enlargement to establish a dialogue between the past and the present was an expedient. It was positioned at the bottom of the staircase leading to the first floor. The photograph was a further account of fashion, one that amplified its meaning in a sort of play of mirrors, evoking too that multiplicity of possible interpretation on which Calvino had insisted in his memos. So it was not just the designed and sewn garment that was presented, but also the one that had been worn, photographed and described. To these levels were added the garment put on show in a museum, which brought the reflection back to the practices of curating, suggesting that this was what was at the heart of the exhibition, rather than the objects on display. On the first floor, the continuation of the exhibition was marked by a delicate curatorial gesture, but one that was at the same time very powerful in the way it showed how the exhibition project was inserted into the museum. And above all, in making it clear that Memos was first of all a museological incursion that aimed to get people to reflect, and not just on the content of a work, but also on the mode of its presentation. A small frame made out of the same pale wood as the elements of display designed for the exhibition, placed on a slender pedestal in dialogue with the frames in the Paul di Pezzoli's collection, showed that Memos was an examination not just of the qualities of contemporary fashion, but also and above all of the relationship between fashion and museum, and this museum in particular. In the large Salone Dorato, which houses Polaiolo's famous portrait of a young woman, a painting that has become the symbol of the museum, the visitor began to encounter some clothes, but used as vehicle to put across concepts. In 1918, this room housed one of the conversations between mannequins that we saw before. And in this case, too, the decision was taken to leave the clothing free from the constraints of the museum on a plinth of pale wood, in dialogue with the tapestry that hangs in the room. Two pieces side by side that represented two languages of construction which pervade contemporary fashion. One, a dress cut and structured to shape the body. The other, a draped dress that took its shape from the body. Giorgio Armani's embroidered garment was a perfect manifestation of the modeling skills that can translate a two-dimensional design into a three-dimensional form, preserving the simplicity of the lines embellished with delicate embroidery. The dress that Maria Grazia Chiuri made for Dior Couture recalled the peplos, a form of attire in ancient Grecia, and also had at the front the words "Art Cloth Modern" embroidered. This was the title of the exhibition curated by Bernard Rudowski at the MoMA in New York in 1944 that looked at fashion as a discipline of design in its relation with the body. Already from this encounter with this installation, it seems clear that what the curators were aiming to achieve with Memos was, to all intents and purposes, a reflection on the most appropriate language of display, a language that would be capable of expressing the disciplinary status of fashion. This is something that happens even in the Galleria dei Ritratti, where they move from the two-dimensionality of the portraits in the museum collection to the garments, also suggesting a connection to the exhibition by Butazzi in 1980, asking Angelo Seminara, which is a famous stylist, to design these wigs that were a quote of the one done in 1980. But this is more a hint other than a didactic activity displayed in the exhibition. So to move to a conclusion, Memos, in its comparison with the project of 1980, became an opportunity to offer some reflection on staging an exhibition of fashion and in the way it was conceived as a three-dimensional means of presenting theory should be placed within the theoretical framework of curatorial studies. To some extent, it can be seen as the marking end of a period of 40 years in which the themes and problems covered by Memos have been tackled on more than one occasion. The exhibition 1922-1943, the one organized in 1980, opened this period by taking on the display of clothing with an attention to its material character and its need from the viewpoint of conservation and restoration. Memos, in the intention of its curator Frisa, which found expression in Clark's system of display, appears to us today as a project that shared with Butazzi and her work an Italian understanding of fashion studies, and one that evoked this theoretical movement through a sophisticated curatorial project. The three-dimensional display sought to take stock of contemporary fashion and its form, but above all, it deliberately reasserted the need to define and organize Italian studies of fashion through means and institutions capable of conserving and exhibiting as well as studying fashion. This is the conclusion of the presentation. Clearly in the full paper, there's a larger and longer description of all the things that happens in the different rooms in the exhibition, but clearly we don't have the time. But the idea is exactly this one, that also at the end of making the exhibition and also visiting and viewing the exhibition, the reference to Calvino becomes less evident, and what becomes more important is the relationship between this exhibition and the museum and the language of fashion curating. So the way you make exhibition, just to make fashion relevant and give her a meaning. That's the main point. So I thank you very much. And I close my presentation, I hope. Yes, I did it. And I invite Catherine is already with us, and also Lucia and Maria. And maybe even the others, if they want to show up, we can switch to the gallery view with all the participants to our panel. And if there are any questions, please feel free to activate your mic and ask questions. And even in the chat room, if you don't want to talk. Or make yourself visible, but it would be nice. Okay.
I have to, indeed. One is for Catherine, and is, have you found bibliography about any other case where they link fashion, storytelling, and Legos?
I've done a little bit of searching, not really. I think that I have come across various anecdotal pieces, and also a lot of Lego theory that's coming through. In Cambridge is a professor of Lego in England. And so there's quite a lot of research coming through using Lego. I think it has, to be honest with you, I think it's coming through. It's not unusual to perhaps focus on something as common and popular as Lego. I think my main motivation was to see how I could apply the psychoanalytic object theory idea of aesthetic and symbolic third. That's a really interesting theory that I'm trying to test in some ways with this. And so I suppose I saw the Lego figures almost as a useful medium, a useful case study to try and work out through that. I'm on a PhD, which is a 5-year part-time PhD into storytelling. And this was a pilot study. And to be honest with you, it was a bit of an eccentric passion project. So I haven't done huge amounts of reading around it as yet from a long-term perspective, but I think it's trying to situate it in the curatorial space and in that psychological approach to fashion at this point. So yes, I mean, there's plenty of information on Lego out there and plenty of people discussing placement of Lego in contexts. But I think my reading isn't necessarily into that at this point. It's more into storytelling through different mediums, of which Lego is a starting point for me.
Thank you very much. It was really interesting.
Can I also jump in for Catherine, following up on the question? Regarding, for example, the storytelling, have you seen, I mean, is there also an impact in what is animation? Because, I mean, Lego is like static, though they also have animation, but I suppose that there is also another area where you can continue in terms of the animation history around this.
Absolutely. In fact, a comment from my son started to indicate that in his thinking. He said he liked the Lego figures and playing with them because he could move their arms and legs. And I kind of laughed because you can't really move arms and legs of Lego figures very easily. They just swivel, but they're not very expressive. But in that limited expression, he found that was enough. And he's a hugely creative person. In fact, my husband is an animation lecturer, and we do a lot of animation in our home. And so I think in his mind, there was innate animation happening through that modeling process. So I think that's a really interesting idea. I think he didn't see that possibility of animation and interaction with the mannequin. I think that's what he was highlighting to me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I have another one for you, Gabriel, if that's possible. Absolutely. Thank you very much as well. That was really very interesting, and I think very well treated and very beautiful as well. And I would like to ask you, after we had also this morning, the talk from Pascal Morand, who was really also interesting. He said something that fashion is not art, but it becomes artistic when it's conceived by an artist. And my question for you is, after all your studies, what do you think about it?
I generally answer this question quoting Richard Martin, which was an amazing curator, and I'm in love with him. He was a genius, and he died very early, unluckily, in 1999. He came from history of art. He was an art critic, and contemporary art as well, very engaged in the scene. And then he became the curator at the FIT and then at the Metropolitan. And he has extensively discussed and treated the relationship between fashion and art, saying that they are two different fields. They share contemporary visuality, and I would say really they are part of contemporary visual culture, but they are two different disciplines with different audiences, different rules. Sometimes they intertwine, and sometimes they share way of doing things, practices, and perhaps also way of being exhibited and told. I think that the idea of storytelling is very important. So they share ways of presenting themselves to the public, but they are two different things. And that is, to me, what he was saying. He said that about the work of Victor and Rolf, actually. It was a very famous article that he wrote. And I think I stay with him on that. That's my opinion. And generally, looking at the work of curators today, I think that most of them are trying to find the specific language for fashion and exhibiting fashion and telling stories about fashion. So that's also what I see in the work. I am not a curator, but I work with them often. And I see that's what they're trying to do right now, actually.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for this question.
Gabriel, can I ask you something in terms of what do you value as more interesting? Because now we see that there are fashion museums, actually. So museums that are dedicated to fashion, but also, as we saw in your presentation, at times there have been museums that are artistic museums, but actually also have some fashion pieces. So I wonder, I mean, it's a different perspective. I wonder if you have an opinion on this. Yeah.
I think that has a lot to do with the history of what we collect and what we think is collection. It's collectible. It's or what we can put in a museum. Clearly, museums with private collections, such as the Paul di Pezzoli, have a collection that is eclectic in itself because they become from a person and its own collection. The Museo Paul di Pezzoli was a private house, and Gian Giacomo Paul di Pezzoli gave it to the city of Milan. So its collection was made of many different things. And you could find also items connected to clothes, garments, laces as well, that were also implemented during the years. But that, I think, asks us to imagine places where we can specifically work on fashion, because collecting fashion or garments or textile, and the Museum of Lyon is another very important example, means also acquiring the capability to preserve, restore them, understand them from also a technical point of view, and not simply as part of an history. So it asks us to imagine as a place, or at least people specifically devoted to these materials. And in Italy, we are a little bit late on the subject. So when I listened to the presentation this morning, I could understand the relationship between France and Italy. We are production, we are textile industries, we are great at making things, less good at preserving them and telling stories about them. We are working on that, but we are a little late on that. The narratives of Italian fashion and the preserving of Italian fashion, it's still an issue for us, actually. Yes.
I wanted to jump in here because we went to the, I don't know if you were in the ICOM General Conference that took place in Milan, and we visited all these museums, and it was amazing. Milan is a fantastic city for this. So, yeah.
It is.
I want to say that Maria Gaton at that moment was the director of communication at ICOM. So
Very
it
important.
was very special also to visit it with her.
No, we had a fantastic time in Milan, and the city was so, it's amazing. I mean, what a city dedicated to art, to culture, how the people were really like supporting the whole project. It was, I mean, bravo, bravissimo.
I would like to ask if there are any other questions. No one from the audience? Okay, I think.
Hello, I'm sorry. Hello again. Hello,
nice
everyone.
To meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you, and thank you, all of you, for this very amazing presentation, using introduction to these heritages. I just wanted to ask you actually a question, Gabrielle, about one very specific things that I saw in your presentation. You were mentioning Bernard Rudowski exhibition, Our Closet Modern, and I was surprised to see actually in one of the different slides that you were showing this kind of I don't know what kind of garment or what kind of clothing was that. You can maybe explain a bit with this a mention of Our Clothing Modern, this exhibition that Rudowski made in 1944, 1945 at the MoMA. And I just wanted to also to ask you how this specific, very old exhibition now has been one of the key exhibition when you look at the fashion exhibitions, the history of fashion exhibition now, and how probably the curators now are considering this specific exhibition as part of the history of the fashion exhibition. I don't even make clear what I'm saying, but I feel like Rudowski is starting to be now one of the very key examples looking at the history of the fashion history in the fashion exhibitions. And when I saw that, I was kind of surprised and interested to know, what do you think about that?
The garment was inserted in the exhibition because that was a piece that Maria Grazia Chiuri did for the Couture Dior collection, actually. And it was the opening number, white, with the embroidery on the front. And it was worn by Ruth Bell, which is her fashion model for the Dior female. And it was the first garment of a totally black collection. And it was the Couture collection. And that garment doesn't look couture-ish in a stereotypical way, but at the same time it talks about draping, building garments that embrace the body and not modify it. And that's the reason why it had the quote of that exhibition, which is actually written in the way Rudowski wrote it for the catalog and the exhibition in 1944. And that is actually, to me, I've studied that exhibition and I've studied Rudowski's work through the years, before the 40s when he was in Italy working for Domus, and then afterwards with his successive projects, exhibitions and book. And that to me is one of the first, I would say the first contemporary fashion exhibition, because it did not organize displays of garments that were telling stories about when they were used, like in an ethnographical museum that was the model, but it discussed the processes of fashion design, the craziness of fashion design, and also the basic design of such designers are Claire McCardell, for instance, and the idea of working on the fabric, on folding instead of cutting, and pattern making. So it was really acute in the way it discussed fashion, using the language of fashion in the way fashion is produced, and also using the word of advertisers, the images from Harper's Bazaar in the catalog. So it was very aware of the different level you need to take in account when you work with fashion. So I think that's an amazing exhibition, and clearly curators today look at this exhibition or are starting to do that. Judith Clark for sure is one of those exhibition maker, because they need to look at what has been done to see what we can do now. This is what she always tells us. When I talk to her and when I have worked with her, had the chance and the luck to work with her, the idea is, let's have a look at what we did so we can try to understand what we can do now, without always repeating the same story, but trying to find new ways of displaying and making fashion relevant to the visitors, because the point is that I don't want to tell a story. I want the viewer to ask something when it moves through the exhibition. I would love that. That's the idea, and not simply telling something. I don't know if I answered. I hope so.
Yes, you did answer. I feel like this exhibition is a key moment for the history of the fashion exhibitions, clearly, and it starts to be now an interesting way to understand the way also stories about that is important to understand fashion in a different way. And I'm sure a lot of the curators are going to look at this specific exhibition and also the work of Rudowski, because Rudowski has been also working a lot on books, and there is a famous way to write fashion history. So I don't want to comment too much on Rudowski because it was not the core of your paper, but I think.
But we can discuss another time, because I'm in love with him, and Richard Martin as well was one of the few, if not the only curator that had Rudowski work in mind. It was a fashion curator that knew very well the work of Rudowski. So I'm very happy about this question because it tackles something that's very relevant to me.
Thank you.
Thank you. I hear someone? No. I would like to ask something to Catherine and also Lucia and Maria. In different ways in your presentation, you discussed something that to me is very important, which is the idea of working on the viewer. So the idea of adding props, the idea of working on verisimilitude instead of being real. So the idea of doing something else other than displaying the original object to create an experience. I think this is a lesson also for curators and people involved in museum. And I would like to ask you if you think that, to both of you, this opens new path of working and reflecting from inside the museum, but also outside the museum, also independent curators. And if also you think, and even if the paper was explicitly connected to COVID, Lucia and Maria, also to you, Catherine, if you think that this moment is giving us something new to think, to start thinking. I mean, that was the core of the paper, but I would like you to say that again, because I think that's very interesting, because it opens new perspective. To me, that's what I perceive listening to you, both of you, the three of you.
Who wants to start?
You can, go.
Yeah. Okay, yes. I absolutely agree with you, and thank you very much for this question. I think, Maria, you can also help me, please. Our contribution with our paper is really that, as you said, what the curator or the museum has to do, or could be, the main paper it has or he has, is the experience for the public. Okay. All the anthropological model is based on motivation, human motivation. There are three kinds of motivation. We have extrinsic motivation, right, which is external, price, money. We have intrinsic motivation. It can be learning, promotion, something internal, but we have transcendent motivation, which is the grade of satisfaction that a person gets, not when you give what you want, as you said before about the curator, is when the person receives what he or she needs. And this creates a link that can't be broken with anything. I don't know whether I have explained it properly. And in this direction, and with the crisis of COVID, this has been really, now we are all living with it. And I don't know, it has been really highlighted. in my opinion.
Thank you.
Maria, we cannot hear you.
I would complete a little bit, as you mentioned, with the COVID crisis. Actually, for this study, we sort of did a little bit of research and see how cultural institutions around the world were dealing with the COVID-19. And there has been several conferences. I don't know if you've seen, organized by the OECD and ICOM and several. And basically, you saw, I mean, the great impact of the exhibitions and the content provided in museums for the well-being of the people. Because actually, I think that, I mean, the beauty of the physical object also comes with the beauty of the philosophical entourment of the object. And all these provide also sense to the people. And now we have seen it like even more essentially because people had more time also to devote to that and needed to have moments of reflection. And I'm sure that all of you have visited different museums and different things during the crisis. And I think that people have valued more what are the essence that we see. I mean, the beauty in itself of, for example, what Gabriel showed of these magnificent exhibitions, this contrast and all the physical aspect and also all the anthropological aspect of those exhibitions that provide also sense in a moment of crisis. So, yes.
Thank you.
I think I'd like to share a little again about one of the insights that the curator said at the Falkland Palace, Naomi Webster. I think we ended up speaking about community rather than objects. And that's where I think this comes back to. When the palace doors are locked, as they are currently, but the gardens are open, only social bubbles who can meet and are able to be together come and visit. Often they're intergenerational if the social restrictions are allowing it. And so pastime and leisure, what we were perhaps thinking about before COVID, has changed. And these are, you know, these institutions where, to be honest with you, we have a right to access, but currently we can't get in. So the curators at both National Museum Scotland and at Falkland Palace are considering how to take the legacy stories and share them out, but also to continue to evolve them moving forward so they don't get stuck in aspic. And the curator, Naomi Webster, she said at the start of the season, normally when they open the palace in the spring, the first thing she does is she goes and she brings all the volunteer guides together, and they are many different ages. Most of them are in the older age brackets. And she asks them what stories they want to tell, what facts they find most interesting about the palace, and what their expert knowledge is in. And then she tries to match that with Lego figures that she can find. And it's the volunteers co-storying this narrative tour around the palace. And there is something very special when you see your 8-year-old for once stop moving and listen to an 80-year-old who is saying, as he walks into a room, you're getting warmer, you're warmer, you're warmer, colder, and he's trying to help him to find the character that then unleashes this storytelling, which in effect is a conversation between two very different people with very different expert bases, but they come together through that single Lego figure. And then my son can walk away and play with that himself at home. And I think that's our responsibility to continue to, as in our positions, to continue to help open those doors and to help that dissemination and that conversation go forward.
Thank you very much. Community is a beautiful word, and conversations as well. I think that's what we need, and what we need now a lot, clearly.
Genuine conversations.
Are there any other question maybe for some of the people who are watching us? I don't see any raised hands. And so if also the other panelists are okay, I would thank you all for working on this panel, making your presentation. They were all very interesting. So thank you very much. I found that also our conversation very interesting, and I'm very glad that we had the chance to have it. And so I thank the organizational committee and also the University of Lyon, which I will love to see, hopefully soon, live. And I thank you, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much,
Thank you.
Pierre, and all of you.
See you around in the other rooms.
Exactly.
Okay.
Again,
Thank you very
thank you.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.